Okay, I think that's us live. Hello, everyone. Going very smoothly already. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the launch party for The Lost English Girl by Julia Kelly. Very exciting day.
Thank you very much.
I am not Julia, shockingly. I am Justine. I am Julia's little sister, and I am going to be doing a little bit of a Q&A with Julia, and then we're going to open it up to your questions. Just give her a little bit of a grilling about her new book.
I'm very excited about it. And I feel like now it's my chance to introduce you. So it's not just that you're my little sister, but you also, in your own right, are a book talker and booktuber and bookstagrammer. And we were talking before when I never know how exactly to sum you up because you do so many different things on the book world. So Justine's going to fire interview questions at me and we'll do a bit of a Q&A with comments, hopefully. Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah, that sounds. I was hoping that Sophia would leave us alone, but she's, so apologies for the cat. But I figured that we would go ahead and start just by having you introduce the book, and we'll kind of talk through it and some of your inspirations and things. And if you guys have any questions or any comments or anything you want to add, go ahead and just fire them in the comment section below, and we'll be able to comb through them. So over to you, Julia. Tell us about the book.
This is my new book, The Lost English Girl, which I'm very, very excited about for a lot of different reasons. You know, we did this for The Last Dance, the debutante, and I enjoyed chatting with Justine so much that I wanted to do it again. So she's very kindly come back to chat with me again. So I'll give you a little overview of The Lost English Girl because it's literally out today. So a lot of people haven't had a chance to get it yet. I got some messages from people saying they're waiting for their books to arrive. They've shipped, but they haven't arrived yet. So The Lost English Girl is a World War II novel that focuses on two main characters. One is Viv, who is a young woman living in Liverpool. She is from a working class Catholic family, and she has a young daughter named Maggie, and there is a second storyline with her estranged husband, Joshua, who is a jazz musician in New York. He has moved there after growing up in Liverpool, and he, after war breaks out, he decides that he's going to come back and he's going to enlist and join the RAF. All of this, you get an introduction to these two characters because Viv is a young Catholic woman, Joshua is a young Jewish man, and they've gotten pregnant out of wedlock. And they are married, and then on the same day that they're married, they are separated. And Viv has not seen Joshua in years and years, and Joshua hasn't seen Viv in years and years. He's never met his daughter. And so on the eve of war, all of this is sort of coming to a head with the evacuation of their daughter to the countryside to try to keep her safe, because Liverpool was one of the areas that was targeted heavily during the war. So the government actually correctly predicted that it would be the subject of air raid strikes as the war unfolded. So to try to keep Maggie safe, Viv has to make this really difficult decision to send her to the countryside to safety. And this kicks off a whole story about family and forgiveness and loyalty and all of those things. It is a book with, as I often like to do, a big kind of twist and a big change in the middle of the book. So I have to be very careful about what I say. And I keep tip-tapping around. I've done some pre-taped interviews before release day, and I keep being like, oh, I can't say that. And I can't say that either. So we're going to do our best to be spoiler free. It's very hard. But I'm really excited about this book. It was an absolute labor of love. And yeah, it's been fun getting to revisit it, because of course I finished up writing it a while ago, and now I get to revisit these characters who I absolutely loved.
The publishing industry is so weird. You must have finished this, what, like 9 months ago, 10 months ago?
I think the last, I think I turned in edits, which is the last time that like major changes happened to the book. I think I turned those in right after we moved. So it was right like first week of June.
Wow.
And then of course you work on the book in terms of copy edits and proofreading. And so you still, as an author, you still end up working with the book and reading it. But in terms of like really getting into the story, it's
Mm.
been basically since last June that I was spending significant time with it. So it's been really fun to go back because I absolutely love these characters and I love where this book ended up.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the maybe not so secret fact about this book is that it is based on a little bit of family history, for our family.
Yeah, so I'm calling it like there's a seed of inspiration there.
Yeah.
So the family story is that there was a young Catholic girl who we were related to many, many, many years ago. So these people are long since have long since died, and she did get pregnant out of wedlock, and there was a marriage to a young Jewish man to legitimize that child, and they were separated on their wedding day, never saw each other again, as far as we know, and we don't know anything else. It's literally that's it. So it really is the seed of inspiration for the book.
Mhm.
And basically, as an author, sometimes you hear stories or you read something or you watch something and you think, that's a little tiny nugget that I want to use at some point in a book. Or it makes you ask a whole bunch of questions that nobody knows the answers to, which was the case with this book. I basically was like, well, like, what happened? What happened? And
Yeah,
who were
yeah.
these people? And like, were they in love? And how did they feel about this? And, was it because their families disapproved? Like, what happened? Because at this point in time, the interfaith marriages were far less common, and they were, in some cases, very frowned upon. And these are people who, in this book, people who are very much a part of their community. In Viv's case, the tight-knit Catholic community in Liverpool and working class Liverpool. And it really matters to her parents that they sort of keep up appearances and are seen to be doing the right thing and doing the respectable thing in
Mhm.
the community, in the church, and also by their parish priest. He has a lot of influence over this family. And so I really wanted to kind of dive into a story where I got to answer some of those questions for completely fictional characters who again have this little bit of inspiration
Yeah.
from that family story.
Yeah, it's one of those stories that's is always like absolutely killed me because again, we don't know anything about it. And so this is
Right.
actually kind of nice to like get that like maybe this happened scenario, even though it is fictional.
It's a real what if, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of great fiction just asks questions like that. What if this happened? How would this person have felt about this? Why did this person make the decisions that they made? So I've tried to think of, I've tried to put two characters into this scenario and basically set them loose and
Yeah.
tried to just follow them uh, along the path forward. And then of course, the war always in novels, is this huge catalyst for conflict and change. And in my books, always, a moment of a woman realizing that her life could be something different than it's been before. And
Yeah.
that's a big part of this book for Viv, because she has to send her daughter away. And then she has to figure out, I don't want this to be the rest of my life. I want to provide a life for my daughter. I want to start moving on with my life. What does that look like? And so she ends up getting a job at the General Post Office as a mail carrier, as a postie. And these were women who were taking jobs in order to free up. They would say, free up a man for the fleet or for the force, or and so women were stepping into these roles that traditionally they wouldn't have had.
Yeah.
And actually, the General Post Office had a marriage ban in place before World War II. So when Viv gets married, she's ineligible to keep her job. She can't keep her job at the post office.
Which is
So she has
crazy
this
to think
opportunity to
about.
go back. It is crazy to think about.
Well, one of the things that I find particularly interesting is this whole history of the evacuated children. Because as people who were born in the States, I don't know if we necessarily would have known about this if it weren't for the fact that, again, we have a little bit of that family history because our mother's family is from Liverpool.
Mhm.
And I find that whole history of these children who were basically taken out of the big cities like Liverpool and evacuated to the countryside, and the burden it must have had on their families, the families who are taking them in, the children themselves. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so there was there were kind of two different ways that people were evacuated at the beginning of the war. So there was the official government scheme, for lack of a better word, called Operation Pied Piper.
Mhm.
And that was children who were school aged and mothers and infants and people who were deemed vulnerable, who were evacuated en masse out of urban centers. So London, Liverpool, anywhere that was potentially a target for bombings because it had significant, centers of government or industry. That was the other big one. So Liverpool had shipbuilding and it had manufacturing, and so it was, and it was a port. It is a port, I should say. It still is an operational port. And so, these were places that they believed could potentially see air raid strikes from the German Air Force, from the Luftwaffe, and that actually ended up being very true. There was, London very famously was heavily bombed during the Blitz. Well, there's actually a Liverpool Blitz as well, a Merseyside Blitz. And part of this book goes into one of those instances of bombings. There were many throughout the war, including some really severe ones. And so I talk about the earliest instance of that. But with Operation Pied Piper, what they were trying to do was to keep these children safe. And so your child would have gone to the countryside with their school group, most likely, often with the teachers kind of observing and making sure the kids arrive safely on these evacuation trains. And they would go to wherever it is that they were going to be sent. So in the case of Viv's sister, who has children, her kids are sent to North Wales, to rural North Wales.
Mhm.
They were sent there, and then they were billeted out into people's homes. So Operation Pied Piper was not compulsory, but having children stay with you or evacuees stay with you was compulsory. So the government had gone around and identified how many spare rooms people had in their homes, what their capacity could be. And so you were told, okay, you're going to take a child in, or you're going to take a pair of siblings in. And these kids were fostered. And as you can imagine, there were wildly different experiences. Some people had fantastic experiences with their foster families. Some people had really traumatic times. They did not want to be, they couldn't understand why they had been taken away from their parents because they were so young. We're talking about, in some cases, children as young as 5. And in terms of that second type of evacuation that I mentioned, there's also private evacuation. So this book deals with a private evacuation because Maggie is young enough that she's not in school during this. And she's 4 when the book starts. So Maggie is evacuated through the church and through an arrangement made by the parish priest. And so what ends up happening is you have different people kind of trying to find different ways to do what they thought was best for their children, and try to make sure that they had the best chance of getting through the war as safe as possible. And it must have been an absolutely gut-wrenching decision for families to have to make, for parents to have to make, and for children who some of whom didn't understand why they were being sent away.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the things that this was I always find the first draft of every book, tough to write because it's a lot of, you're creating new stuff and you don't know where the book's going. And often it goes way off track. This was a really tough book to write because it's so emotional, I think, trying to figure out what that would have felt like for these characters. And so it was really satisfying also because when it came together, I felt like I got it, and I was able to sort of really dig into what that might have been like for these characters. But it was a hard one to imagine because I think that's very difficult for us to understand. Although, of course, we saw children evacuated out of Ukraine during the invasion, and that's something that's still ongoing. So I think one of the things that's always important as a historical fiction author and reader to remember is these might be stories of the past, but often there are threads that we will see in modern society that people are going through now. And my hope is that it makes people more empathetic to what's happening at the moment.
Absolutely. Well, the kind of just the thought that these kinds of things are still happening actively today is kind of a crazy thing to think about. And
It is.
I found Julia will know that I found there's a couple of scenes at the beginning where Viv is trying to decide whether or not she's going to evacuate her child. And as Julia will well know, because I told her, I sent her a picture of my crying face about 53
I
pages
got
in
in
the
trouble.
book. It's very, very effective and it's very emotional. And you really get the sense of just, I think it's an easy thing for us to say now, well, I would never evacuate my child. Or, well, why don't people just pick up and move to the countryside themselves? But those aren't easy decisions to make. And oftentimes they just weren't possible, 'cause especially you're dealing with working class families. So there's the question of money, but also these neighborhoods that are so incredibly tightly knit. You have an entire family, you have a home, you'd have to abandon your home, you have to abandon everything that you know. It's just everything is a big mess.
Yeah. And I think that that's, I wanted to write this scene early in the book. And again, this is not giving anything away, but early in the book where they first realized that Operation Pied Piper is going to go forward. It was announced in newspapers. It actually, interestingly, I didn't realize this, but the operation began on September 1st of 1939. War was actually declared on September 3rd of 1939. And what's interesting is you got notices before the 1st of September. So the government knew enough to know that probably it was going to be a good idea to start this moving forward. Then Germany invades Poland on the 1st, when the first evacuation trains are moving forward. So you can get a sense of like how tense it was and how much of a sense of foreboding there was, that people were being moved out of cities and moved out to safety before there was any actual declaration of war. So it's such a fraught time, and I really wanted to try to dig into that scene where these women, so Viv, her sister Kate, and her mother are sitting around the kitchen table having this conversation. Everybody has a slightly different perspective on how and what should be going forward, and Viv is a little bit in denial because her daughter is her world. She has made her daughter her world, and she does not want to admit what is going forward. But she very quickly realizes that they are in fact going to be going to war, and she is trying to do the best she can with what situation she's in.
Yeah, just to make the impossible decision.
She really does. She really does.
So one of the things that I think is particularly interesting about this book is the war didn't just happen in London. The war happened
No.
in Liverpool. We were talking before starting this about sort of the book and what we were going to talk about and everything. And you made such a good point that the war happened across the entire country and many other places in the world. And Liverpool is such an incredibly vital part of the story. And it's so central to what happens. It's central to kind of like the culture that these people belong to, and the neighborhoods and the families and all of that. Was it a very, very conscious choice to write a book that wasn't set in London, or was it just something that you decided to do because that's where kind of we know about the evacuated children just from our own family perspective?
I think that because that grain of inspiration came from a story that happened in Liverpool, it felt impossible to me to disconnect the story from the city.
Yeah.
So there's that to some degree. And I think also I've been sort of itching to write a story. I love writing about London during the war. I think it's a fascinating place and so much happened there. And I've written quite a bit about London, although I've also written about Warwickshire, which some people are always like, why Warwickshire?
Of all places.
And the answer is I know it well because we have some family connections there. But when it came to Liverpool, I thought it was really interesting to explore another place that was heavily bombed, that was really affected by the war and was really important to the war effort, but is different than London and went through a different experience. People, one of the things that I tried to do was join up as much accurate research about sort of where places were hit, how they were hit, the dates, the timings, all of that stuff, in order to try to give a sense of, this was terrifying because what was going on in Liverpool, famously, Coventry was really heavily bombed and pretty much decimated. Coventry Cathedral is a famous. If people don't know that photograph, they should go and look at some of the damage that happened there. You have bombings in Glasgow and all up and down the coast, and obviously London was torn apart by the Blitz. I really wanted to write this book that showed a different aspect of the war, kind of invited readers to explore what happened in World War II outside of London, but also because it felt so important to keep that setting true to the story. I wanted to make sure that Liverpool felt like a character, felt like you couldn't set that story anywhere else.
Yeah.
And so, I went up in, I was in Edits, I think. And I went to Liverpool. I had the chance to go up and do a bit of research there, but also to just be there in January and remember, oh, it is cold. I forgot because it's been a while since I had been. I forgot how cold it is with the wind coming off of the Mersey and off the Atlantic, and how you're constantly surrounded by the sound of gulls when you're downtown, and the way that the central area is laid out, and Liverpool Lime Street, the station, and all of these things. So it was really wonderful to be there and be able to I hope people see little bits and pieces of that threaded through the book as well.
Definitely, yeah. Well, it does have such a strong sense of place, and one of the things that I love about your book so much. You really get the opportunity to use your resources in this country because we both live in the UK. Yeah. You're able to go and sort of absorb the sights and sounds of these places, and obviously, like, you can't travel back, but there's something about places like Liverpool that feel almost timeless. Sounds really, really cheesy. But
there are elements to the city that are recognizable to people, and no matter when you've lived there, that things like the cold wind and how the city looks and the city feels, even though it's changed obviously over the decades. I hope that rings true.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when you were there, what kind of research did you do? Because I know you do a lot of research in London, but was there any particular special things that you got to do and see in Liverpool that helped with writing this book?
Yeah, so the Liverpool Central Library has a fantastic search room, and I basically emailed them out of the blue and said, I'm interested in all of this stuff and about, the bombings and the war. And they set aside some resources for me, lots of microfilm. Not my favorite form of research. I always manage to thread the machine wrong and upside down every single time, or I find the machine that's broken every time. But I was able to go through, newspaper clippings, and they had sounds odd to say wonderful, but they had a wonderful collection of photographs from printed photographs from the bombing. So you could actually see literally, like, this is this street, on this day, and the bombing aftermath. And so you could see the damage, you could see some of the reconstruction as crews were trying to, clear the streets, even just to make it passable. Yeah. And some other fantastic resources, or people kept records of when they heard the air raid siren at the beginning of every night or day, and when the all clear sounded, where bombs fell, what was damaged, what was hit. So because Liverpool, like a lot of urban centers, there is the center, and then there are neighborhoods surrounding it. And so there are different neighborhoods that get hit. There are different types of damage happened. And so much like London, where a lot of people know the East End got hit, but you had bombs falling everywhere, and so different places might have been hit on different days. So I tried to incorporate as much of that as I could into the book, to try to give it a real sense of what had happened. And just talking about things as simple as buses getting rerouted, or a character being delayed because there was bomb damage on her way into work, that she had to get around and kind of reroute around, and how it would have changed the day-to-day of people's lives as well.
Yeah, those kind of nitty-gritty details. It's incredible that they have that. It sounds like an amazing archive.
It is, and I actually forgot to tell you about this when we were chatting about it earlier, but there have been a lot of school projects also that have worked with the search room, and they've archived that that work. And a lot of school kids in the 80s and 90s did oral histories. So, they would have been probably, 14, 15, 16. It's probably one of the projects for their sort of leading up to their exams. And they actually went and they spoke to people. So they spoke to women and men who were evacuated children. They went through and they compiled, in some cases, they compiled newspaper clippings with some of these accounts and these stories, and the photographs of evacuated children are fascinating and heartbreaking. They're the little kids with the coats and luggage tags and the tiny suitcases and their gas masks. And they're absolutely emblematic of what was going on during the war. And getting to see those and getting to read the accounts of people who had been there and remembered what it was like was really, really interesting. So I could talk about libraries and archives for days. I think they're fascinating resources.
Yeah.
And they just did a wonderful job preserving a lot of that history.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds amazing. I kind of want to go.
Yeah. You kind of just rock up and be like, "Hi, can I get an appointment?"
No reason, just want to see.
Yeah. No, it was wonderful. It was really, really great to get a chance to be there.
Well, I wanted to ask you about characters before kind of opening up to questions from you guys, but actually Susan asked a really, really good question.
Oh, great.
Which leads perfectly into kind of the next bit. She says, most of your characters were vividly portrayed and quite sympathetic to the reader. Was it more difficult to understand and write those characters who are not so nice and help the reader accept that except they had the kind of not so pleasant personality traits? How were you able to get into the heads of those negative characters along with the more sympathetic individuals? This is something we talked about a fair bit before we started this, and I think this is really fascinating because both of your main characters are really, really interesting, complex people.
So I think that's the key. I think you want to write about complex people. And I think as I get further along in my career, I am trying more and more to be conscious of the fact that I want to write flawed characters who you can still sympathize with when it comes to your main characters, but who you don't necessarily agree with them and everything that they're doing. So I think it's always much more interesting to write characters who have a bit of complexity to them. But before kind of talking about that a little bit more, I think villains are much, much more interesting if they have a clear motivation and you can understand it. So much as I love, the old Bond villains, sometimes you can sit there and be like, but why do you want to take over the world and blow it up? Like, what's the motivation behind this? Like, I don't understand.
That's my big question throughout the last one. I was just like, but
why? So, I always think that it's much more interesting when a villain, especially, or a character who you're intended to like less, still has a very clear reason that they're doing something. Even if you completely disagree with that reason, you know where that person's coming from and that makes sense to them. So the things that they're doing are logical to them and motivated by something that really they care very much about. So in the case of, I think the most obvious example in this book is Viv's mother, who is not a sympathetic character. I don't find her a sympathetic character, but I think to her, what she is trying to do fundamentally is protect her daughter. I don't agree with how she goes about it. I wrote her and I don't agree with how she goes about it.
Doesn't win many Mother of the Year awards.
No, she's not the warmest character in the world. But what she thinks is going to keep her daughter safe and is going to ultimately be the best for the family is to adhere very strictly to the sort of social conventions within the community, and also what her priest and her religion has told her is right. And it means that she, I hope, comes across as a character who, again, you might disagree with completely, but you can understand where she's coming from, just from a pure logic perspective.
You don't have to like it, but you can understand it.
Right, exactly. And I think that always makes it a little bit more interesting. When it comes to sort of those complex characters that we were talking about, I remember where I was sitting with our mom in the summer house in the garden reading, and she said, it'd be really interesting if you wrote a book with a complex male character.
Mm,
And I kind of went, oh, that's interesting. I guess I never really thought about how complex male characters are or aren't in my books, because so far they've been secondary characters. And
yeah.
so in having Joshua be a first person, or not a first person, rather, a main point of view character, um, you have to really live with Joshua throughout the book and contend with some bad decisions he's made, or some decisions that you wouldn't necessarily make yourself. But then also with how much he grows and how flawed he is, but how those flaws ultimately end up making him into the person that he is by the end of the book, who I hope is a person that people have a lot of sympathy for and a lot of empathy with. Same with Viv, actually. I think when I first wrote this book, I was definitely guilty of sort of putting much more blame on Joshua than I did on Viv, because I tend to write female characters and I tend to obviously I sympathize a lot with them. Because of that, I think I needed to level out some of the blame. So Viv makes some very rash decisions. Viv is very stubborn and very hard-headed in the beginning of the book, especially.
Yeah.
She also has kind of allowed certain things to happen to her before the book has started, but then also as the book is progressing in the early stages. And she really needs to have a moment where she grows up and she decides that she's going to take control of her life, which somebody pointed out to me the other day is a hallmark of a Julia Kelly character. She has like a moment where she decides she has to sort of like grow up a bit.
That was a very good point. I can think of some of those moments.
So I think in Viv's case, she is also flawed. And she also, although we might be very sympathetic to the fact that she is essentially a single mother in a community where being a single mother was not socially acceptable, even though she has this estranged husband to give legitimacy to her daughter, people know why they got married quickly. People know why they're not together. And so she, I think, has a lot of those traits that makes up the sort of sympathetic heroine, but I hope she's a bit more complex than that. And people find that they don't like some of the decisions that she has made, and they don't like some of the things that she sets out doing in the book, but that she grows again, the way that Joshua has to change and grow throughout the book. Viv also has to change and grow until she becomes the person that you ultimately close the book at the end. And that's the person you're left with.
Yeah. Well, did you find it hard to kind of, it feels to us and kind of the culture that we're in and sort of the privilege that we have and everything, it feels like these issues that they have, the interfaith relationship, the getting pregnant out of wedlock, the interfaith marriage and the separation, did you find it hard to kind of balance what you see as kind of like your modern values and sort of how society is today, which has changed dramatically over the past however many years? Did you find it hard to kind of like strike that balance, especially when trying to make those characters complex?
Yeah, I think, you never want to, at least I never want to drop a thoroughly modern character into an environment where realistically, at the beginning of a story, she wouldn't necessarily have that thought process, or she wouldn't necessarily act in the ways that I might act as a woman, in the 21st century, in 2023. So I think you always have to be a little bit careful about how you balance those things out, as you say. One of the things for me was making sure that Viv and Joshua and everybody else in this book adhered to the time and the place and the culture that they were being raised in. So Joshua has a different experience, a different family, with different values and different things that they're trying to do, and ultimately things that they want. Joshua's family, it turns out, wants a relationship with their granddaughter, and that comes as a surprise to Viv, and she finds out through various ways that that's been the case for a long time. And it really is a moment for her where she realizes that she's dealing with a very different family than her family. But I think with those instances, it is very tempting sometimes to, again, put and project everything that I feel into these characters. But I think it really starts to not ring true if that's the case. And so that's where I kind of try to go back to, you know, who is this person? Why are they making the decisions that they're making? What is it that they want? What are they motivated by? There's a great sort of writing shorthand called goal, motivation, and conflict. So, you know, what does this person want? Why do they want it, and why can't they have it? And using that framework is really, really helpful to kind of keep me on track and say, okay, if Viv wants this, because she wants the best life for her daughter, this is the conflict that's going to, you know, hold her back from that. And it's, you know, internal and external conflicts can be the source of that. So in her case, you know, she's fighting against a family structure and a culture that says, well, she can't have some of these things. So what is she going to do to try to overcome that?
Yeah. Well, I am very curious about because again, what we discussed earlier, rewriting, especially in terms of these characters and how you kind of, because they're incredibly effective in the finished copy, but maybe that wasn't necessarily the case the entire time.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. So my editor Hannah is a wonderful person, and my agent Emily is a wonderful person, and both of them read the first draft of this book when it was really raw, and I really struggled for different reasons to finish this book. This book ended up being about I think 110,000 words. So that clocks in at, it's roughly about 400 pages. I handed in about 40,000 words longer than it currently is. I was apparently working through some stuff and just figuring some stuff out. I had tangents, I had secondary plots, I had characters who I killed off in the edit. I was a mess. But you know, I think sometimes as an author, you know that something is not working and you don't know what it is. So you need somebody else's perspective. And also you need to step back for a little bit and let somebody else read it. And what ended up happening was I had gotten some feedback from my agent. And I was like, okay, great. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And then I spoke to my editor, Hannah, and she said, you know, I don't know that this is really working right now. I think maybe we might need to tweak things, because I had taken this big time jump. So I had gone from 1941 all the way to 1961. So I had this 20-year time jump, and then sort of the action picks up again, and it just wasn't working. I was trying to make things happen that weren't going to happen. Maybe because I like the clothes. I don't know.
Good.
The clothes are good, but you know, she said, you know, I don't think it's working. And I was like, oh, great. So I'll just go ahead and rewrite it so that the last third of the book happens in 1945, and I'll change the second part. So all this stuff, it's like everything locked into place. And I think she was a bit like, are you sure you want to do all that work?
Great idea, but
and I was like, no, I think this is really going to work. So the story now picks up in the third part after VE. It starts on VE Day and goes on from there. So the end of the war in Europe, and then goes on, and it just worked. It just started to lock into place. And I think it was not only understanding that what I was trying to do wasn't working and I needed to just step back and radically rethink it. But it was also understanding that there were bits and pieces of those characters who weren't complex enough yet. So when I was talking about sort of wanting to build out all this motivation and things for characters and making them flawed but empathetic, that wasn't there yet.
Right.
And so I needed to rebalance things. And once I got that balance right, it really just flowed. It worked really effectively. There was a lot of pain getting there.
Yeah.
A lot of words that will never see the light of day.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, another very exciting thing about this is that this was the first book that you wrote as a full-time author.
Yeah.
You're holding down a full-time day job, quite an important day job, and writing for what, 10 years?
Yeah. I have been a journalist, and then I moved into the corporate world, into tech, running a content team. So I was working and kind of fitting writing in where I could. And I was very tired. So
you were tired. Yeah. There were a couple of times where before we moved to the UK, mom would send me a message and be like, make sure Julia gets outside today.
Yeah, that was good. Solid advice. Yeah, it was a really, really big change and one I was really happy with. I literally quit my job in June of, gosh, now I have to like count, June of 2021. And I
Right.
started writing this book. It was like around June 20th of 2021. And I started writing this book, I think it was July 15th, because I gave myself almost a month off to just kind of, that was some advice
I
that I
remember
got from
that.
a friend. Yeah, so one of my
That was
friends
a
made
good
the jump.
period of time.
Yeah, she had been an attorney and then she went to write full time. And she said, you're going to need some deprogramming time where you just kind of, you don't think in terms of your old job anymore. You don't think in terms of like the meetings that you have to do and the schedule and all of that stuff. You just need some time to relax and decompress, and then you can start up again, which was great advice. And I was really, really glad that I did that. The thing I wasn't so glad about was that I find drafting to be, like I said before, kind of the most emotionally tiring, the most mentally tiring, because it's brand new. It's all, creating something out of nothing from day one. And I think every author always starts on page one of a book and thinks, I have no idea how I did this. And I have no idea how I'm going to do this again. This is crazy. So I did all of that and then took all of the structure that I had in place to sort of, that I had learned how to find the time to write. I had taken all that away and just been like, have an open, free day. And I thought that was going to be the best thing in the world. And it turned out that was really hard because you don't sort of have your routine down, and the day is very long and very short at the same time. And so I really struggled for that first month to figure out how to write again in a weird sort of way, even though this is, I think this is my 12th book, which is crazy. I know, I think it's my 12th book. It is really, really, it is really strange when you take away your routine and when you take away all the things that you've learned and kind of the ways that you motivate yourself, because you've got 90 minutes and that's all the time you have. When you suddenly have kind of supposedly all the time in the world, it can be really tricky. So it was definitely a learning process, writing and relearning how to set my working life up. And I'm really proud of what came out of that. I'm incredibly proud of this book, but it did make me sweat for it and really work for it.
Yeah. You mean writing full time isn't just gazing out the window, waiting for oh my goodness.
In my Parisian attic? No. No, it's not. And let me tell you, when you're not working full time, it's really hard it's really hard not to think about all the things that you always said that you would do if you had the time. So all the marketing and all the research, and then just the day-to-day business. This is so unglamorous, but like paying invoices and recording things for your taxes and just the kind of process of making sure that everything stays on track so that you can actually continue to be a full-time working author.
Yeah. Well, those are all the questions that I have for you. It looks like we've got Scottish Husband is MVP and has been sending me questions
Oh,
throughout.
wonderful.
So I've got a couple, so I've got like 12 devices open right now.
You are doing a great job and I appreciate it.
I'm doing my best. So just kind of gonna rattle through some of them as they come up. But again, if you guys still have questions, feel free to converse and throw them into the comments and such.
Cool.
So first of all, from Brenda, happy Pub Day. How will you celebrate?
Thank you. I am celebrating by not celebrating yet. So my fiance is actually traveling right now, which is probably for the best because it means that he doesn't have to deal with me kind of doing interviews all the way up till like 10 o'clock at night. But yes, but when he gets home and things calm down a little bit, we are going to go out to dinner, which will be really nice. And we had a bit of a pre-celebration. We went out for a really lovely meal on Friday night. So it's been really nice. I might, I don't know, pour myself a whiskey once everything's done or something like that. But yeah, other than that, it's pretty much just working solid tonight because obviously being in London, it means that time zone wise, the evenings are much better for me in terms of interviews. So.
Very nice. Well, I hope you're having a good day so far. I think you've got more interviews today, don't you?
I have one more, yes. So we're powering through.
We're with you. Susan says, I was fortunate enough to read an arc of The Lost English Girl, and I can say it's definitely a masterpiece, Julia. I loved every word.
That's lovely. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Susan, if Susan I'm thinking of was very kind and did a read for me because one of the things I really wanted to be respectful of was I'm not Jewish and I'm not Catholic. So I wanted to make sure that people who had those backgrounds and were from those religions and had some of that cultural background also got a chance to read it beforehand. So sensitivity reading was really, really important, and I appreciate it. And her husband helped with some of the Hebrew too, which was so sweet of him.
That's really nice. You must love Ancestry. You're inspiring me to dig. Oh, sorry, this is from Cindy. You must love Ancestry. You're inspiring me to dig into a couple of stories from my ancestry and the unknown story behind them. That's very cool.
I'm really glad to hear that. I always love hearing about people who sort of decide that they're going to do a bit of research into something that, you know, that their parents did during the war, or their grandparents did, or I just think family history is fascinating. And I really like getting in and looking at the records and seeing seeing who's come before and what they did. I think the census is really great for that over here. It's always really interesting. This is deeply nerdy.
I was going to say, I think you might be the only person excited about the census.
No, I'm definitely not, and you would be shocked. The census is here in the UK is protected until I think it's 100 years from. So we just had the 1922 census. I think I could be wrong about this, but I think it was the 1922 or the 1920 census. Just got declassified is not the right word, but was just made public, basically.
Got it.
It means that you can do things like dig into the records and figure out like who lived in your house and what were your family members doing, and it's really cool.
If the place that I lived in wasn't 10 years old.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're in a new build, but
yeah, it's not exciting. So another really lovely comment from Stephanie Likes Books. I connected with the emotional decision by Viv to evacuate her daughter. I couldn't have imagined how hard that must have been and how you made it so real. Again, I cried on page 53. This is me. I cried on page 53 of the arc. So yeah, that was very hard.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And it's a very strange thing as an author to say things like, I'm really glad you cried, or I'm so glad that sort of made you emotional. It makes me sound terrible, but at the same time, it means a lot. Let's put it that way.
If I was an author, I would be cackling and relishing in reader tears, but you're much.
I do usually laugh I usually make sure that you're actually okay, and then I usually laugh pretty hard. So
she's got a selfie of just my face, just eyes filled with tears.
Sometimes you're holding a cat, you never know.
Yeah. From Karen, Mum went to Helmsdale from Edinburgh to stay with family. My granny missed her children so much that they eventually came home and stayed in Edinburgh for the rest of the war.
Oh. So that's something I actually didn't get a chance to explore, but people who came back before the war was over. And there were waves of this in some cases. Some people brought their children back and then they were evacuated again, or they moved out, or it's just, there's so many stories there and so many stories still to tell. And actually, a quick plug, if you're interested in evacuated children's stories, first of all, the book by Juliet Summers, When the Children Came Home, is fascinating and was one of the books I used as a resource for this. But there are 2 novels coming out. After seeing very few British evacuated children's stories for a long time, there are 3 of us this year. So Patty Callahan Henry is the Book of Flora Lee, I think it's called. And I wish I had it with me right now. It's downstairs on my bedside table, but Hazel Gaynor's book, The Last Lifeboat, is also about evacuations, and they're all completely different stories. We all kind of had a chat going, being like, what's yours about? What's yours about? We're writing
the same thing.
We're writing totally different things. And so it's really, really interesting. This is just such a rich, fascinating area of history that I think a lot of people still don't know a huge amount about. So yeah, there's lots of stories there.
We've got Susan. I know you're working on your mystery book for later
Yes.
this year. Hoping that it's another historical fiction is in your future plans as well. Are these characters still living in your head, especially during your launch? And are you ready to say goodbye to them eventually?
You know, I never say never in terms of saying goodbye to characters, because I think even actually it's funny, I did an interview, a pre-taped interview yesterday, and the interviewer asked me about every single one of my books. And I was sitting there and I was like, I am impressed. I remember this much. Which made me laugh. But so you know, you never really stop thinking about those characters, I think. But in my head, I usually kind of, the ending happens and they're living good lives
Mm.
after the end of the book. So the main characters are living good lives. The mystery I'm very excited about. It is the first book in my Evelyn Redfern series. So that is, I should be getting proofreading pages very shortly here, which means it's really, really in the advanced stages. So ARCs are going out soon to early reviewers, and that book comes out in October. So that's really exciting. It's different. It's you know, first person. It's very voicey. My character Evelyn Redfern is an amateur sleuth who's got you know, a lifelong passion for reading detective fiction. So you know, everything from Agatha Christie to Ngaio Marsh to you know, Anthony Berkeley and all sorts of other golden age of I almost said golden age of Hollywood, golden age of detective fiction novels.
I clocked that and I wasn't even going to flinch. I was like, yeah.
And so Evelyn gets recruited to work as a typist in Churchill's cabinet war rooms, which is actually a place that you can visit now in London. It's my favorite museum in London, the Churchill War Rooms. And something is going on down there, and she's supposed to be the eyes and the ears for an old family friend. But of course, very shortly into her working there, somebody dies in rather dramatic fashion. And so she takes it upon herself because she doesn't think the military police are competent in this case. And this pair, they're on shaky ground. And so she takes it upon herself to investigate this mystery. So I'm really excited about that book coming out. And then I am working on another historical fiction, which is slated for 2024. And it's so new that I'm currently in the middle of it. I'm in that sticky middle that is so delightful. I find I love the beginning of books and I love the end of books, and I find the middle of books I tend to go through various stages of being grumpy about them. So I'm definitely in the like grumpy but see the path out, which is good.
Yeah.
And so I can't say anything about that because I've learned my lesson about revealing things before going through the editing process, because I rewrote the whole back 2/3 of The Lost English Girl. So I've learned to be very careful about that. And I am instead just going to say that it is another World War II book, and it takes characters to some different places.
Mhm.
And I hope that people will really enjoy it. And I'll have, of course, updates for my newsletter when that's when I can start talking about it.
I'm really excited for that. I think it's going to be really good. I have the insider knowledge.
You do. Although really funny, you actually, I realized that I changed track and I was working on something that I've decided to park, and I didn't tell you. And so for like months, you thought I was working on a different book. And we had this moment with you and your husband where I was messaging you guys, and I was like, yeah, so I'm working on this and this. And you're like, well, what happened to this other book? And I was like, guys, like, there was a whole thing, like this whole thing happened. And you're like, you didn't tell us any of that. So
If it had just been me, I would have assumed that like I just completely forgot about the conversation. But he was also like, wait a minute. And we were so distressed for like half an hour being like, we're terrible people.
no, I just didn't tell you. Sorry about
That was
that.
a funny night.
I went through the whole contract process, and I was convinced that you knew what I was talking about, but you had no idea.
No real idea. That was fun. That was a good day.
It was funny.
From Christine, we have a question about your absolutely lovely cover. The cover of this book is absolutely haunting. Did you have any input on the cover? I love that cover.
I love this cover too. I think it's just
Beautiful.
talk about this sort of the emblematic of the time, like photographs of the children on the train platforms. This is perfect. I love everything, including the little mitten. Here I have a scarf that I've just made in this color actually. I just love this cover, and I had not a thing to do with it. I am not a visual person. My realm is words, and so I trust the cover designers to take the feeling and the mood and the themes of the book and figure out a way to represent that in ways that I never could. I have never had a cover that I have given much direction on at all, other than to say, like, this character has red hair and this character is blonde or whatever. It's much better if I leave this to the professionals.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's kind of like the funny secret of publishing is very, very, very rarely do authors have any input on the covers.
Yeah, I get to say if I like it or not, and if there's anything that I think is off, and whether there are any changes. So that sometimes, and I am the worst. I am that person who occasionally has sent a note back being like, I love it, but I feel like it needs a little something, just like a little oomph. And I'm sure cover designers are just like, I hate you.
Literally anything other than oomph.
Yeah, just a little something.
From Stephanie, going back to the characters, and sort of
Yes.
the complexities of the characters that you wrote, was the less nice character also less nice to show the resilience of Viv, and how the story is really about her and her struggles with difficult decisions?
Yeah, definitely. I think you always want to include moments in a book where somebody is tested, or they have to kind of figure out what they're really made of, what the metal of them is. And I think in Viv's case, people and the influence of the people, significant people in her life, it's so important that you really do have to write those moments in. And there are even moments where there was a moment with Viv and her sister where, and I think Viv's sister is a very sympathetic character. I think she's really got, Viv's back, and but sisters aren't perfect, and sometimes we do things that we disagree and all of that. And so I wanted Viv to have a moment with both people who were clearly, a more negative influence in her life and force in her life, and then also somebody who really thought she was trying to do the right thing for her and had her back, but also gets a little fed up with her at some point, which again is, sisters. We've had a couple moments where one or the other of us is just like, oh, stop it. Like, and then we cry, and then usually we're good again in about 10 minutes. And I'm sure that, our respective partners are just like, what is going on? So I definitely think that secondary characters can serve that purpose really, really well in highlighting that aspect of a character.
This is a really good question from Sherry. Have you met any interesting people during the research of your book?
Oh, that's such a good question. So with this one, I didn't meet. Oh no, I did. I'm sorry. I lie. I met some fantastic academics who spoke to me. So I met I'm going to make sure I get their names correct. So Dr. Toni Kushner, and I believe her name is Dr. Teresa Ward, were wonderful in helping me. Let me just make sure I got that correct. Yes, that's right. They were wonderful in giving me context for life in Liverpool at this time, especially within people of the Jewish faith. So Liverpool didn't necessarily have a designated neighborhood where people had sort of been living for years and years. The community was much more integrated than that. And Liverpool is a port city, as I mentioned before, and you have a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds all living together in neighborhoods. And so they gave me a lot of context for why Liverpool might look a little different than some other neighborhoods, for instance, in Manchester or in London that might have been traditionally Jewish, and what that experience might have been like. And Teresa Ward in particular has written about interfaith marriage during this time. And so it was really interesting to get a chance to chat with her back and forth about different stories that she had heard. There's a wonderful project of oral history at a museum, and I'm going to get the name incorrect, unfortunately, but a Jewish history museum in Manchester. And I believe she did some work with them when she was a doctoral student or a doctoral candidate. And so getting their perspective was incredibly important. And my old editor, who is no longer my editor, but was very kind and did a sensitivity read for me, is Jewish herself. And so she was able to add some really wonderful texture to the book and, answer some questions that I had about sitting Shiva and other, customs and practices that I didn't necessarily have firsthand experience with. So that was wonderful. And when it comes to my previous books, one of the people I met, and I like telling this story because it's a very small world. One of the people I met, I had placed an advertisement in a magazine called The Lady. And The Lady is an old women's magazine that's been around for ages and ages. And it still has like little advertisements for like seeking a housekeeper or a lady's maid or a chauffeur. So, feels very much like a sort of vestige of another time. And I put an ad in asking to find out whether anybody had been a debutante in 58 or in the years around it, because I was writing The Last Dance of the Debutante, which is about the last group of debutantes presented at court to Queen Elizabeth II. And somebody answered my query, and she had been a debutante and she had been presented. And so it's fascinating talking to her. And it turns, this is a really protracted connection, but it turns out that she was for a period of time, was the stepmother of my osteopath's best friend growing up. And so I know. So, and my osteopath's up in, not in London, she's, up in the Midlands. And so it was so funny that I got a message from her because my dad had brought a copy of The Last Dance of the Debutante to his appointment because he goes to her as well. And he'd given it to her because he figured she would love it because she's really interested in the 1950s and really interested in that time. And she got all the way to the acknowledgements where I acknowledged this woman who had helped me. And she messaged me and said, "You will never believe it, but this is that connection."
That's
and I just thought,
amazing.
the world is about this big. And it was so funny. So I actually saw her relatively recently, and we chatted about that and all her stories from her friend and growing up. So it was really fun. It was a fun connection.
I love that so much. There's one from Cindy that I can answer. Did Justine provide any input as you wrote The Lost English Girl? I cheer-led from the sidelines and then cried when I read it, and that was about it. I'm not the historian.
My family is really fantastic about, you guys are really good and will pop up when I call upon you, when I need you. But you're also very happy to just be like, "Are you doing okay? Do you need us to send you like cups of tea? Can we help with anything?" And you are very good about helping with all of this around release day. So, but Mom actually spoke to me about life in Liverpool and in that community that she experienced, and sort of the stories that she had been told over the years, which was really, really helpful for giving again some texture and some detail to Viv's life and Viv's family and community.
From Teresa, how did you learn about this family history for the base of your story? Did you try to research further into family history to the true story of what ultimately happened? Were there any surprises? And what did the extended family think of the book?
So I don't know if the extended family's read the book yet, although unfortunately all the people who would have been directly connected to that have passed away. So the family story, family stories are a funny thing. I've always loved them on both sides of the family. I love sitting down, especially often it's later at night when people sort of have a cup of tea or a couple glasses of wine, and suddenly the stories start coming out. It's sort of like, "Oh, well, you know that this happened." And I'm like, "No, I had no idea. Please tell me everything you know." And so I've always been like that. I've always been interested in that, in those stories that get passed down. So I'm not entirely sure where that one came from, but I also was lucky enough to spend a little bit of time time with our family in Liverpool when I was a study abroad student at Manchester, actually, which is very close on the train to Liverpool. And so I was able to kind of spend time around relatives as a young adult. I was 21 years old, and able to chat with them and ask them a bunch of stuff and see photographs and all of those things. So somewhere in there, I ended up hearing about this. And family, I always call them family stories or family legends, because sometimes they can be changed and it's a bit like a game of telephone. So I would never say that, I would never say that I know all the details by any means. And again,
the hard and fast truth. We're all
and again, that's that's why, I talk about a grain of inspiration rather than, a retelling of a family story. And it's important to make that distinction. That's kind of where those things come from. It's all kind of kicking around somewhere in my brain.
From Susan, what is your favorite part of the writing process? Research, the actual writing, character development, or editing?
So I do love research, and I really love the editing process. I love getting a chance to work with something that is raw and is on the page and might, quite frankly, not be very good, but has the bones of something there. I find that really, really satisfying. I could research until the end of time. So I do have to be careful sometimes there and sort of decide that the research is done and I need to, or at least the preliminary research is done and I need to move on with the writing. And usually I can tell if I'm under researched. Like I know I'm under researched in the book that I'm writing right now. So I have two different storylines going. So I'm working on the one I know more about at the moment, and I'm reading up on the other one, just to make sure that I get that balance right. So that's always a bit of an ongoing process.
Yeah. Do you ever get to sort of draw on the research from previous books for your later ones? Like, do you have stuff stored away in your brain?
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite things about writing in the same time period. Obviously, with The Last Dance of the Debutante, I moved up in time to 1958, but for the most part, I have been within the war years. Now, it's very different writing a book set in 1939 to spring of 1940 than writing a book set in 1941-42, which is what I'm doing right now. So I know that sounds strange, but the Phoney War, when not a lot happened in terms of land conflict, was the beginning of the war. And then the Blitzkrieg begins, and you go kind of everything just accelerates massively, and the threat and the danger really accelerates. And so that's what I'm writing right now, is sort of this book that's it's happening when the Blitz has happened, and that Phoney War is absolutely over. And so it's very different, and people's attitudes are very different. But the thing that is really helpful is there's some consistency around, like, knowing some major dates, understanding the rationing system that rolled out, although I'm learning very intimately about clothing rationing right now, and I don't find that straightforward, but I don't think anybody else did either.
Yeah.
So at least I'm in good company. And so, there are things that I can definitely draw on from previous books, especially knowing where to get information, I think, is one of the biggest things when you're starting up a new era, or you're writing about a country or a culture that you don't know particularly well. Sometimes it can be difficult because you don't even know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So at least if I'm writing in the realm of World War II, I generally have a sense of, okay, if I'm looking for something, I can kind of put my hands to some books that might help me out.
Got it. That's interesting. A couple of rapid fire questions before we wrap up. First up, you mentioned whiskey earlier. So from Sandra, what's your favorite whiskey?
Well, I'm sitting next to the bar right now because I'm actually at the dining room table, which is why you don't see the bookcase that you used to see behind me. But with the setup that I have, it reflects all this light off of the glass cabinetry. So I'm trying this instead. So I swear we still have books in the house.
A lot of them.
A lot of them. So I'm actually looking at it right now. And I think that after this, I might have an Arran single malt, which is really lovely. And you guys very kindly gave my fiance a bottle of whiskey for Christmas, I think it was, or for his birthday.
It's his birthday.
And we have so many bottles that are so close to being finished, but we've sort of been like testing and, you know, trying different things and enjoying that we need to finish at least one, because it actually doesn't have space on the bar right now, which makes us sound like huge drinkers, and we're really not.
No, you're not really, are you?
No, but people do, when people find out you like whiskey, people like giving you whiskey as gifts,
yeah.
which is wonderful. But I don't drink whiskey fast enough to drink down the gifts that I've gotten. So
Probably not a bad thing, but at the same time, a shame.
yes, it is. So so I never have a drink before I do any interviews or anything like that, because I think that's a bad idea. But it's a nice little nightcap at the end of the night on release day. So I think I will have one of those. Although I'm looking at it now and I'm like, there's a lot of choice.
There are kind of two questions in one that are very similar. So do the cover designers, going back to the covers, do the designers ever read the book to get kind of a feel for them before they actually do the designing?
You know, I don't know. So if anybody knows a cover designer and can answer this more directly, oh, you do. So my guess is that they do so many covers over the course of a year that they can't read all the books that they are working on. And my guess is they get kind of a synopsis and a brief, possibly the synopsis that I submit when I'm pitching a book, which would be terrifying.
Yeah.
But my guess is they don't actually know all the details within the book, but they're trying to evoke sort of the genre and the time period and a sense of what happens. So is that accurate from what you know?
Yeah, I mean, I work in academic publishing, so it's a bit different. But what we do, and I imagine what traditional publishers or trade publishers do, is you get basically the designers get a brief from editorial, because editorial had read the book. So they'll kind of get, it could be vague ideas. It could be, this is a cover image that we want to use. And then they kind of go off of editorial's knowledge, sometimes doing sort of variations on a theme, and
Right.
work on it with them.
Yeah, you see a lot of, obviously, the famous woman with her back turned in period.
Yeah.
That's, well, a
Always walking
Spitfire
away in a
flies
green
above her,
dress.
walking away. And you know, there's a reason that I know people complain that a lot of those covers exist, but they tell you exactly what kind of book you're going to get, right? You're going to get a woman-centric World War II novel, or you know, World War I in some cases novel, and it's probably going to have some heartbreak. It's probably going to have some, you know, some testing that character, and in some cases it's going to have a somewhat hopeful ending, although sometimes TBD. I always remember the first time, because I used to write historical romance, and I had a reader very kindly reach out and say, you know, I'm really excited about your next book because it's something different. It's historical fiction, but I just need to know, does anybody die in it? And I was like, oh, it's a book set in World War II. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, but this might not be for you. So yeah, I don't know if she actually ended up reading it or not, but sometimes it can be a bit tricky.
Yeah. There's a joke, a long running joke for the entire year of, I think 2018 or 2019. I read a lot of fantasy books. And in YA fantasy, every single cover had a snake on it for like
Yeah.
a year. So
And
it
it
was
was all
YA
like,
snake. And she
it was
got
all like the city of something and something,
a
or
blank of blank
like
and blank.
the blank of blank and blank. It's like the
It's still
city of
ongoing.
skulls and bones or something like that.
Yeah.
Presence and love, or you know,
Yes.
so conventions happen for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. You know exactly what you're getting, and that can be a very good thing.
Yeah.
And then last question, will you be live? This is from Brenda. Will you be live on Friends of Fiction tomorrow night, or will be pre-recorded due to time zones?
I will be live. I'm really excited. So
Woohoo.
I think when I have to think back, because it was the Last Garden in England. You guys have no idea how hard it is to go The Last Garden in England, The Last Dance of the Debutante, and The Lost English Girl. So I have to really think and make sure I get the right
The
title.
Last English Girl would be a good
The Last English Garden in Girl. So I was on Friends and Fiction for the Last Garden in England, and that was pre-taped. So this is going to be the first time I'm live with them. I'm really excited. I have been staying up later to make sure that the time zone is not a problem.
Oh,
I was-
Julia.
I felt like such a rebel. I was up until 1 o'clock in the morning yesterday, and I'll do that again tonight because it's a midnight time zone thing for me. But I love those ladies. They are just fantastic company, and I've been lucky enough to get to know a few of them in person as well. I haven't met all of them, but I've met a few of them, and they're just great company. So I'm really, really excited about it, and I think they do great things for the author community and the book world in general. They're really generous with their time and their platform.
Oh, that's very exciting.
It'll be fun. So I hope some of you will watch.
Yeah, I know Dad's gonna watch.
Oh, he's gonna be up late.
Maybe he'll watch the day after if it's a bit late. But Dad watches all of your
Yeah,
stuff.
my dad is in the Friends and Fiction group, which I is not giving anything away because that group is so big. But every once in a while, he'll send me little links and screenshots when Friends books come up and people who he's heard me talk about. It's really cute. So you never know whose dad is in that group.
It's true. Well, that's all for the questions that we've got for you, Julia. This was really fun.
This was great. Thank you so much for doing this. I love talking to everybody, but I really love talking to you because it's just fun. And you have a different perspective, obviously, being my sister,
Yeah, well,
like being all the behind the scenes.
he can grill you about, it could be books or it could be, did you or did you not borrow my top in 2004 and not give it back?
Probably, yeah, probably in both directions. You probably borrowed stuff of mine. So
I stole a lot of your tops.
yes, you did. They're coming back into fashion too, which is the terrifying thing.
Yeah. One of my friends is wearing the like spiky headband things. It makes your scalp hurt just thinking about it.
It does. It does.
Well, good. This was really fun. Congratulations on your new book.
Thank you very much.
I hope you guys all enjoy it. It's a beautiful book and it's very close to our hearts, I think.
Absolutely. I really appreciate this. And thank you everybody who watched. And yeah, if you hadn't had a chance to pick it up, it should be in bookstores. So yay.